Hi guys, it's Damien.
And I'm Kenady, and thank you so much for joining us again this week. Now we're continuing our series, Basic Training, and we're talking about being all in or not being entangled in civilian affairs. And it comes from 2 Timothy 2 verses 4. Soldiers do not get tied up in the affairs of civilian life, for they cannot please the officer who enlisted them. A couple weeks back we talked about pleasing the commanding officer, and so we're talking about how we can completely be sold out for Christ and not being caught up in worldly things.
This reminds me of a story, a true story from the Civil War. Kenady, there was a watchmaker who was enlisted into the military, and one day the horn went off and it was time for war. And the commanding officer approached the watchmaker, and as he was fixing a watch, and the disappointing face on the watchmaker said it all. The commanding officer said, "It's time for war," and the watchmaker was like, "I can't go to war right now. I have to fix this watch." And the point of the story is that he had two affections. One was in the war and one was as a watchmaker. So my first point here is a question. Am I fully committed or wholeheartedly committed to the army of God? Or what we could say is, am I committed to that cultural influences that we talked about in previous videos? Am I committed to that, or am I committed into civil affairs? So back in a time with Christ, there was Roman soldiers, and when you actually enlisted into the Roman army, you left everything, your husbandry, you left business titles, you left your trade. And this is what we're trying to say, and we all are guilty of this, and I'm guilty of this myself, is sometimes I want to cling to those civilian affairs. But are you willing to leave all of it? The high paying job, the status, are you willing to leave it for Christ and a life of faith? And there's two examples in the Bible that we probably don't want to follow, which is Nicodemus and a rich young ruler. But there's one who is in Elisha that we can actually look up to, and it's found in 1 Kings 19 to 21, where Elisha comes and places a cloak on Elisha and walks away, and Elisha actually runs after Elijah and says, I want to follow you, but let me go back and kiss my mother and father and get rid of my work. And so what he does is go back and he slaughters the oxen, he burns the plow, and he distributes the food to his community, kisses his mother and father, and leaves everything. And what this story teaches us is, am I willing to burn up my past for a future of faith with Christ?
Yeah, that's so good. And I know that's very hard to do. And I commend like Elisha and even the disciples that left everything to follow Christ. And so are we willing to do that? And so Christ says, count up the cost. Before you decide to truly become his disciple, we have to count up the cost, that we're leaving sometimes a lot of security that we might have in worldly things, but we have security in Christ. And so the next point is leaving worldly desires. Before we come to Christ, we might have lived in a reckless worldly living, but when we come to Christ, we no longer live in those worldly things. Yes, we're in the world, but we're not of it, and we're supposed to stand out and be holy. And a couple of scriptures that I wanted to read it comes from Romans 13:13, and it says, because we belong to the day, we must live decent lives for all to see. Don't participate in the darkness of wild parties and drunkenness, or in sexual promiscuity and immoral living, or in quarreling and jealousy. And another one says in 1 Peter 1:14 through 15, so you must live as God's obedient children. Don't slip back into your old ways of living to satisfy your own desires. You didn't know any better then, but now you must be holy in everything you do, just as God chose you who is holy. And so we might see the world and people just living it up and just YOLOing, and you might say like, man, Like, I want to have fun. Like, we can have fun, but we have to know that there's a higher calling on our lives, and that it's souls that are in need of us to be in position and to spread the gospel. And we can't live in two different lives. He says, be hot or cold. Don't be lukewarm in where you're causing confusion or being a stumbling block for someone else. We have to be able to spread the gospel and live holy as Christ is holy. It doesn't mean we don't have fun. It just means we don't live in that darkness that I mentioned in those scriptures. And so we have to choose to live for God, not of the world, and that we're coming out of the world and we're being set apart. And so we can't have two masters. We have to choose Christ or choose the world. And there's not both.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, this particular message was all in, or being all in the basic training series. Please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram at Damien and Kenady. That's Damien and Kenady spelled out. My name is Damien Nash.
And I'm Kenady Nash.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.